Hello, welcome to Genesis Office Hours, episode number 43. I'm your host, Carrie Dills, and I've got something really awesome on tap for you guys today. We're going to be talking about accessibility. I'm going to introduce my guests in just a moment, but first, our show is sponsored today by the Utility Pro theme. It's not out yet, but it's coming. Rumor has it possibly in the next 24 hours. It will be the first translation-ready and accessibility-ready theme for Genesis that is premium. There is a free theme out there, and we're gonna talk about that on the show. But to my guests, I've got the lovely Rian. Then I've got I can't roll that R. And I'm Carrie. And we also have Graham. I can't even roll that R either. My gosh. We've got Graham Armfield on the show, and he's having some computer issues. But without further ado, how are you guys doing?
Excellent.
Good.
Cool. Appreciate you coming on today. Rian, I want to hear how you guys got started even thinking about accessibility. Well, what put it on your radar? I'll start with you, Rian.
Well, for me it's actually a commercial choice, because in the Netherlands all websites for the government needed to be accessible, so I thought that's a lot of work. So I trained myself to build accessible websites, and then the government chose Drupal instead of WordPress or Typo 3 as CMS. So I didn't have any work from the government, but I have got a lot of work from other companies or associations that need accessible websites. So. And while building sites and learning and meeting people with disabilities, I kind of got my heart into it. So it's from a commercial choice to a passion at the moment. Yeah.
All right, and Morten, how about you?
Oh. How I got started with accessibility. I think it had to do with web standards first. When as some people who watch this may know, I spend most of my time teaching web design and development, and one of the foundations of teaching web design and development is teaching web standards, so people understand the core elements that go into how to build a website. But another big part of it is to teach communication, because it's easy to forget. The entire purpose of the web is to make communication through the internet as easy as possible, and to communicate ideas across the network that engulfs the entire planet. And part of that is to make sure that people can actually access that content once it reaches its destination. So web standards is a huge part of it. And part of web standards, or at least in theory, is this idea of accessibility, that anyone should be able to access the content in whatever way they want. So using any device they want, get it read back to them in any way they want. Because although a large portion of society uses screens, that's not necessarily the only way people access content. Now, in addition to that, my parents, when I grew up, both of them worked at a rehabilitation hospital. My dad's a doctor, and my mom was an occupational therapist, and then she became a webmaster at the hospital. And so I've grown up my entire life being around people with different types of disabilities, and seeing how challenging it is for people to just function in society, not because it technically is challenging, but because we in society make it challenging for them, has been something that's been around in my life basically since I was born. And what I've noticed is a lot of the time it's not actually a matter of things being complicated, it's a matter of us people who don't have disabilities and don't have accessibility concerns creating situations that are complicated for those that need to use accessibility tools for no really good reason. And that's especially true on the web. So my interest in it comes more from a I really want the web to be a communications platform, and I want everyone to be able to access it. And for that to happen, we need to have accessibility on the web. And then when you go look back at where the web came from and the impetus of the World Wide Web as it was, the whole point was to make information accessible. And it's through the ability to design the web that we've actually made the web inaccessible. So now it's time for us to make it accessible again, because that's the way it was supposed to be from the get-go, right?
So we've mucked it up, is what I'm hearing.
Yes.
We've gone and done things like sliders and crazy menus and made it not very friendly to. Yeah. Graham, are you with us? Let's see. Hey there, Graham. Maybe not.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, there you are. Hello.
Yes. I'm having real technical problems at the moment, so I don't know what you can see, but I think not much. But at least you can hear me now.
Well, it looks like your laptop is radiating.
Yeah.
It's like it's calling to Super Friends or something.
I'm hoping it's a positive kind of radiation rather than a toxic kind of radiation, but there you go. So at least you can hear me. You can't see me and my guitar collection up on the wall, but at least you can hear me.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate you joining us. I don't know if you heard or not, but I was asking both Rian and Morten kind of where did they first get their interest in accessibility when it came on their radar, and how about for you?
Okay, well, it was about 12, 13, 14 years ago. I can't remember exactly now. I used to work for a large financial company here in the UK, where I'm based. It was in London, and I was one of the web developers that looked after the main brochureware sites that this financial company had. And one day I was given a presentation. It was by some developer in some user agency, user experience agency, and he said, "Come and have a look at this." And he showed me how a screen reader worked. And I'd never actually come across a screen reader before. It was like an early version of JAWS, I believe it was. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. And he explained, how people who had vision impairments, blind people, use this software, and that was amazing. And he also then gave me a couple of pages which was sort of like highlighted how it is that you can make your websites so that they work with screen readers, and that was just brilliant. It was I kind of saw the light at that moment. I'm thinking, much as what the bits that Morten touched on, is that the internet is such a gift for everybody, and is such an amazing resource. And the people who brought us the web, if you like, they certainly, I'm sure, didn't get into the business of excluding people from it. And as soon as I saw how easy it was for developers to make websites accessible, I mean, it was a bit crude 12 years ago, then you thought, well, why wouldn't everybody do that anyway? Because it's not that difficult, and it can make life, it can make a real difference for lots and lots of people. And so I got bitten straight away, and fortunately, the marketing department of the company that I worked for also saw that there was a two-pronged sword there. There was like, firstly, they were keen to maximize their the use. They had like online banking coming along. I worked on that as well a bit, and they wanted to sort of kind of encourage people down that route, because it's sort of, it was to do with cost savings, really, I guess. The other thing that they were interested in was not getting sued by people who couldn't access. In the UK at the time, it was the Disability Discrimination Act. And like a lot of financial institutions at the time, they had products that were internet-only products that gave you like savings accounts that gave you a better rate of interest. And so they were concerned that they could get sued because they were financially discriminating against people, and so they embraced it, and fair play to them. And so from that time on, all the websites that the team that I worked with were involved in became really accessible, and it was great actually. And it was I was kind of sad to leave that company about 5 years ago, but I chose to, because I chose to come and set up on my own to specialise in accessibility more. So that's how I got into it, and what it means to me, really. It's about making sure that everyone's included. Like, it's real much an inclusion thing.
Excellent. Well, a lot of the folks that are listening right now and that listen to this podcast are either web developers or designers. They're either creating products for use by others, or they're maybe customizing themes and that sort of thing for their customers. And so much around accessibility. I mean, we could talk till it was bedtime over in Europe, and maybe even bedtime in the U.S. But the main thing I'd love to accomplish with you guys today is debunk the myth that accessibility is hard to do, hard for a developer to implement, and debunk the myth that accessible websites have to be ugly.
Yeah.
Not true. So I'm going to do a terrible wordplay here, but let's make accessibility accessible to developers that want to know more. So where is a good starting point? Rian, I'll let you take that one.
I think you have to make you have to look differently at a website, not just how it looks, but you have to look at the HTML. Let the HTML tell the story about the content of the website. So, for example, a person who is blind looks at the website linearly from up to down. So he has to know the story about what the site is about. You can do that with headings. And H1 this is the page, what the page is about, and it's divided in H2s, H3s, and then you can tell what the structure of the page is. When you can see in one time the whole structure of a page, what everything is. But when you're blind, everything is read out to you from top to bottom. So if you have a well-structured HTML, then it's much better for a blind person to understand how your website, or what the content of your website is. The second advantage of that is Google is blind, so Google gets it too. So that's the basic. Your HTML must explain what the content of the page is. And then you can add a lot of pizza on top of that. Slide shows whatever you want, but the HTML must be correct, must be explaining what the content is.
So it's like going back to 8th grade English, where you have to write your papers and you write a title and you write an outline and you know, bullet points. I think before I understood that the importance of what you just said, Rian, that those headings need to be in order to tell the story, I would use those H tags for style purposes. So let's say that the H1's bigger than the H3, and I really wanted this sentence to make a statement, so I'd throw in an H1 tag. And now I know that that's
Well, you put your style sheet off. Just disable your style sheet and look at your page. Can you make sense of it? That's if you can make sense of it, there's a lot of gained then. So disable your style sheet. What happens to the content? What's the order? You can do that easily as a web developer. So try that once with your sites.
I think a big part of this is, and this is especially true for WordPress, that when you come to web design and development, you often come to it from a perspective of, I want to make something that looks good. And especially with WordPress, you have this massive abstraction where you don't actually see what's going on behind the scenes. So in many cases, if you're creating content, let's say I'm writing an article, I could actually mark up my article properly within WordPress using the headings and using everything. But when I publish that article onto a website, I'm now at the mercy of my theme and the plugins that are on the site to make sure that it gets displayed properly, because the responsibility of marking it up for accessibility lies in many respects at the person who built the site, and the person who built the site is the theme developer. So what is happening a bit here is that Whereas us really old fogies who worked with the web when it was static and had to write out all the pages from the top to the bottom, line by line, for us, it's obvious that HTML is the content. And then the styles come on top of that, and then all the interactive layers like your JavaScript come on top of that again. But for people who start working with WordPress as their first entry point, it's not clear that the content sits in HTML. And a breach between what is important and what appears to be important, but is just appearance. So the best example I can give you is right now, you can go into a car store and see demos of cars that have Google and or Apple or Microsoft integrated. All these cars are completely internet enabled. You can even buy cars in the United States where you can stick a little SIM card, and then the car itself has its own internet built in. And what's going to happen is all the people who drive these cars are going to start wanting the car to read websites back to them. So the idea of separating the content from the style isn't just for the few people in the world who need accessibility tools. It's actually something for everyone. And it's it goes back to the idea that the web is something for everyone, and accessibility benefits everyone. If you have one of these, the phone thing or your watch or whatever, devices also rely on accessibility tools. So you can't simply think it's what I see on this big-ass monitor in front of me anymore. That's not how the web works.
Can I join in here? In terms of thinking about getting the developers to think about accessibility, I've done as Morten has, I'm sure, and Rian as well, a number of presentations for developers over the years, not just for WordPress developers, but loads of other ones. And I think one of the keys to understanding accessibility is to actually get people to understand why it's important and how simple things can actually make a real difference. And so sometimes I like to demo screen readers and voice recognition software and just using the keyboard rather than the mouse, and so people can understand the issues that are there, but also then encouraging the developers to think as accessibility as an unwritten requirement, because in most transactions between a client and a web developer, accessibility probably doesn't even get mentioned, and so that's possibly why there are so many inaccessible websites out there, is because no one thought about it at the time when this website was commissioned or when they were putting the content in. And so I encourage developers to think of it as an unwritten requirement that is that should go into your website. But also, once you understand how it is that people who are blind, say, or people using voice recognition software, how they interact with websites, then it kind of sets in a problem in your head. And developers generally, as a whole, are quite okay about taking on new technologies, whether it's CSS3 or HTML5 or a bit of jQuery here and everything like that. That never seems to present a barrier to most developers, and people get their teeth into it and take some time to learn how to do it. And the same is true of accessibility. It's like a new problem. And so if you can engage your developers' problem-solving skills into sort of getting them to think about how to do it, and so that if they understand how it is that they make a website accessible, then it can unlock the key there, and they can see actually how easy it is to actually do that. And I've been building accessible websites for many years now. I'm not a designer, but I can take pretty much any design. I'm sure Rian's the same. You can take pretty much any design, and you can make an accessible website of it. And so it's down to the quality of the design. There are certain functions that you might have to work them slightly differently. Excuse me. But in terms of making a beautiful looking website, that's down to the designer, and you can pretty much take any design and turn it into an accessible website.
The question I get most from people I talk to when I say I build accessible websites, oh, can you tell me how I do that?
Yeah.
People really want to know, and but they don't have a clue about what's important or not. For example, you can use JavaScript. There's a myth that you can't use JavaScript on accessible websites. That's not true, you can. And if you can make the most unaccessible functionality in your website, fashionable Google Maps with all kinds of functionality, but you have to provide an accessible alternative. For example, a table beneath that. So you can do everything you want, but you have to provide an accessible alternative. But there is a lack of knowledge and also a hunger for knowledge, I think, in the WordPress development with people. Every time I go to a WordCamp or a meetup, people ask, but how? How do I do that? So in the Make WordPress Accessible team, we are now developing documentation and code snippets and patterns. It's not online yet, but we are working hard to get all that material published so that all WordPress developers can access that and see how they can improve the accessibility of their website, how they can make an accessible drop-down, an accessible carousel, an accessible, whatever, skip links. So the documentation will be available, but not yet. We are working very hard on that because a lot of people are asking, how do I do that?
Well, somebody asked, I believe it was Jan asked over on Twitter, and if I haven't said this yet, you can send in questions via Twitter by just tagging your question with hashtag GOHchat. There are two free plugins in the WordPress repository that take care of some major accessibility issues for you. One is called WP Accessibility and covers some general WordPress accessibility issues. And then Rian, you happen to be the author of the second plugin, Genesis Accessible, that addresses some issues specific to the Genesis framework. Explain how someone could, as a first step toward making their site more accessible, could just plug in one of those plugins or both of those plugins and make a difference.
Well, you have to start one level above that. In the WordPress theme repository or theme directory, there's a tag called Accessibility Ready. And there aren't very many themes there. I think it's like 0.8% of the themes have Accessibility Ready as the tag. But if you start with a theme that's already at least tested for accessibility by the accessibility team, then you have a good baseline. From there, you have to make sure that your content is accessible. And that's possible through plugins. And of course, if you have a theme that's not accessible and you want it to become accessible, you can use those plugins to get part of the way there. But the reality is, no matter how much you try, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be where you really want it to be unless it's built that way.
Morten, do you have a favorite accessibility ready theme in the WordPress repo?
I have one in the accessibility. I have one in the repo that is accessible, which is called Simone and has quite a few downloads. But I think part of this project that we're working on in the accessibility team is to try to make the accessibility ready tag something that theme developers prioritize when they make themes. And there's many reasons for that. One is that, as the platform that powers 23% of the web, and every fourth website ever built now is WordPress, we as a community actually have a responsibility to do things right for the web-using public, and also to set the standard for everyone else, because people look to WordPress to see what is going on. And for that reason alone, we should do things properly. We're already doing web standards. We're already doing responsive. We're already doing translating. We're doing all these things. We also need to do accessibility, because that's kind of the core of the whole point of publishing content online. The other reason is, around the world, governments are fed up with web developers not caring about accessibility. So they're just passing laws saying, I don't care if you don't care about accessibility. We do, because this is a rights issue. So we're just going to impose on you, if you have a website, it needs to be accessible. And if the WordPress community doesn't catch up to that, we're going to see a situation where users will end up having to switch to different platforms that are accessible because they don't have a choice. And this isn't just businesses. In the United States, it's businesses, and in Canada, it's businesses. In Europe, it's not just businesses anymore. So it's becoming very quickly a big issue. And the rest of the web community is actually picking up, and we're kind of lagging behind on it. And it's in large part due to a lack of understanding of what's involved, a fear of it, and also a thinking that somehow it's complicated and expensive. And that's just a matter of education.
I think it would be useful for WordPress theme developers to actually have a look through the requirements for the accessibility ready tag, because actually when you look through that, in order to satisfy that tag, there's not a lot that you need to do, really. There's certainly nothing complicated in there, and it is about demystifying the process and about showing people how easy it is to actually to do these things.
Yeah, and it is standard. I mean, if you go back in time, sorry, Carrie, I'm totally taking over. If you go back like 3 years, do you remember how hard it was to do accessible websites? And how responsive websites. Everyone was freaking out about responsive design and saying, I can't figure it out. It's so hard. Why do we need to do this? And trying to come up with like really weird solutions to solve the problem. Like they would design websites that only matched 2 specific screen sizes and all this crazy nonsense. And then eventually people realized, oh, this actually has a tremendous impact on my website. If it's responsive, more people use it, so therefore I'm going to do it. I think we're hitting a point now with accessibility where people are realizing it's the same. It's not that it's hard, and it's not that it's expensive, it's that we don't know how to do it. So once we learn how to do it, it's just part of the process. And I noticed one of your, someone asked a question on Twitter about how do I convince my clients that this is necessary? The simple answer is you don't. This is not a conversation you have with your client. This is something that you just deliver as part of your project. You build a website, it's accessible. That's how you, part of that package is that it's accessible. You don't say to the client, we're going to add on an extra plugin feature that makes it accessible, because that's not how accessibility is done. Accessibility is done at the very top of the project. You build your content, you build a core of the website, and in that core of the website is all your accessibility features. Then you add styles on top of it, then you add all your interactive layers, and that way you don't have a website where you have to like cobble it to make it accessible after the fact.
That kind of made me think of mobile responsive themes. 2 years ago, maybe that was people were dabbling and trying to understand what it meant to write media queries and all that stuff. And now I couldn't imagine delivering a product to a customer that wasn't mobile responsive. To your point, it's just something we don't even talk about it. It's just it's an underlying expectation and something that we're going to deliver. Boy, would it be nice if accessibility came along that same way. Graham, we can see your face now.
Yes, I was. I had my team of little technical elves working whilst we were talking, and I managed to get my webcam working.
All right, excellent. And nice performance, by the way.
I hope it was worth it.
Well, since this is Genesis office hours, let's talk about the Genesis framework for a second. We've got oh gosh, I don't even know where to start. Rian,
yes,
you created the Genesis Accessible plugin to address accessibility issues with Genesis. Can you kind of give us the 30,000-foot overview of what those issues are?
The main issues are the drop-down menu is not keyboard accessible. If you have sub-menus, you can't access them by keyboard or see what you're doing. There is in the search form. There's no label attached to the input field, so someone who uses a screen reader has no idea what the input field is for. I think she can guess this must be a search, but no one is reading out for her from what's it about. The heading structure is not right. Sometimes H1 are missing, other times there are double of more H1s, so that's the semantics of the headings is mixed up. There are no skip links, and in the admin area there are a lot of problems too. Graham did an accessibility audit of Genesis, of the sample theme, of the framework, of the widgets, and of the backend. And there were a lot of issues with that. Also, with the sample theme, the color contrast is not very good. So if you're old like me, you can't see very well what are links and what are the words when you have gray, open gray, just dark gray text and dark gray background and a light gray text. I can't read it, for example, but it's very fashionable, but a lot of people can't read it. So the color contrast can be improved too. My plugin does the heading structure, the drop-down menu, the label for the search form, and adds skip links, and fixes the color contrast, because I have a theme with it that's called Leiden, and in that theme, that's a modified sample theme, all the color contrasts are fixed.
Yeah, if you're monitoring the GOH chat hashtag, somebody tweeted a link to, but it's genesis-accessible.org, and that you can pick up both the Genesis Accessible plugin there and the Leiden theme.
Yeah, you can't use the theme alone. You have to use the plugin with it to make it accessible. So the plugin work together. Yeah.
So Graham, Rian mentioned it a little bit there, but you just completed, or recently completed, an accessibility audit for Genesis.
Yeah, that's
what
right.
was? How did that come about?
Well, it's through Rian, really, because she's been connected with Genesis for quite some time, and we were originally talking about it in the summer, and nothing seemed to happen at the time. But then I think the time was obviously right, and they got back in contact with us before Christmas, and we arranged that I would do an accessibility audit of the theme, and so that's how it happened, really. And so we scoped it out, and then we sort of worked out how long it was going to take me, and so obviously then how much I would charge him, and so that's how it came about, really.
Let me unmute myself. Well, Brian Gardner, if you're listening, and Nathan Rice, we're excited that you've chosen to implement some of those changes, and we look forward to a future release of Genesis that includes those. I'm not sure the timeline on that, but I guess. No,
it'd be interesting to know, because I mean, obviously Genesis is one of the most well-known frameworks out there, if frameworks is indeed the right word. And I was really excited to get to do this, because if you can get it right and with such a big setup, then that's gonna help loads of people, because there are an awful lot of people out there who use Genesis.
Absolutely. Let's talk about how you test a website for accessibility. And Ben asked specifically, what about screen reading tools? What would you recommend as testing tools?
Can I say something about that?
Sure.
You can do two things. You can do yourself. You don't have any software needed for that. Disable your style sheet and go through your website tabbing. Just tab and see if you can access all the links. You can do that yourself. It's very easy. Put away your mouse, just tab through the website. Can I access all the links? Remove all the tab indexes and stuff from Genesis, from Gravity Forms, for example. They mess up the tab. Just see what happens. And no test. That's very easy to do for yourself. Okay.
Perfect. But you can use tools.
Yes.
Beyond that, I actually had Amanda Rush, who's I think listening right now. She uses a screen reader, or maybe even I don't know what kind of equipment she has lying around her house, but she was gracious enough to test Utility Pro for me, and that was just something I've felt so uncertain about because I don't have a device to test on. So for people that don't have a screen reader readily available, are there tools out there that mimic that?
Yeah, I just sent you the link. The absolute easiest thing you can do, if you don't want to buy software or install software, and you have the Chrome browser, you can get an extension called ChromeVox, which is basically a screen reader for Chrome. That will give you an entry point that costs you $0 and is quick and easy to use.
But then you have to use Chrome.
Yeah, you have to use Chrome. What do you use? Safari?
I'm using Firefox, and I tried a couple of weeks ago. I tried going cold turkey and only using Chrome, but it just got on my last nerve. It seemed to be a bit of a battery hog and crashing.
Well, as a web developer, you should really use all the browsers because, as you know, you have no control over what browser your visitor uses, right? So I'm just being an ass. The ChromeVox works well because it's very simple, and you get the first-hand experience. If you don't want to do that, you need to install some sort of actual screen reading software. Using screen reading software is very educational. It's true, especially if you open a grid browser and you try to navigate by telling your browser, go in the upper quadrant number 1 and click on number 3. And it's spectacularly frustrating. And you realize just using that for 5 minutes, you will never consider accessibility to be something extra anymore. But getting access to those things takes time, and it takes time to learn. So,
I would agree with Morton up to a point. I test a lot with NVDA these days, which is actually a free, fully functional screen reader that you can download. I believe it's just available for Windows machines, but I know that Brand Duvigneau, who Rian and I have both met a few times, he does actually run it on his Mac because he's got some kind of Windows boot up there. I don't pretend to know how that works, but because it's free to download, it can be used by anyone. And some people are reticent to get people loose, set people loose on a screen reader on a machine. But I think it's a good opportunity for people to try stuff out, and it works best with Firefox, and so that will make some people happy. But once you install it, the thing to do is to, there's a couple of things that are key with a screen reader. I mean, there's all sorts of keystrokes and bits of functionality that are useful to help people orientate themselves. But with NVDA, the first things that I try, and this is simple stuff that anyone can do, is the first thing is you just, as Rian said, you will tab around the page, and NVDA will announce things that it lands on, whether it's links or form elements or stuff like that. And so you can get an idea whether or not your form elements have the right labels, because if you land on a text box that hasn't got a label, then NVDA doesn't really tell you much because it hasn't got anything to go on. And so that's quite revealing. Also, typically on blog pages, blog index pages on sites, you'll have like read more links, and so then you can, if every other link that you come across just says read more, then that's going to tell you that you need to provide context for those links as well. The other thing that's really useful in NVDA that I go straight to when I'm doing accessibility testing is there's a facility to list links and list headings on a page, and that on my machine is you use the keystroke insert plus F7, and it just pops you up a box, and it will you can then actually just use the up and down arrow keys to move through the headings on the page, which gives you a sort of good idea of the structure of the page and help you find stuff that's that is of interest to you. And also then there's an option to list all the links on the page as well. And these are functions that pretty much everyone who uses a screen reader, because JAWS has the similar functionality as well, and JAWS being the sort of like the most popular screen reader in the world. NVDA is the second most popular screen reader in the world. Both those screen readers have this functionality, and it's widely used by people who rely on screen readers to browse the web. And so you get this list of links on your page, and so you can see whether or not in a table your links make sense and whether your heading structure makes sense. So those are sort of two really simple things that you can do with a screen reader as a quick test to see whether or not your page is going to help people find their way around. I mean, there's obviously a lot more to it using a screen reader than just those two things, but if you do nothing else, then that's certainly going to make it help.
Some platforms also have some level of screen reading built in. Both Windows and Mac have voice control and screen reader capabilities built in. I think on the Mac it's called VoiceOver, and on Windows it's just called accessibility feature or something like that. What I have discovered is that cell phones actually do a really good job at reading content back to you. It's easy to get them to do that, probably because of hands-free features. So that's also a way of testing it. It's actually a way you should be testing it, because the world is different when you're on a small device than when you're on a big one.
That's right. At demonstrations to WordPress developers and others, that people who are interested in screen readers, when we're standing about talking, whether it's in the venue itself or maybe down the pub afterwards, you just say to someone who's got an iPhone, and they get it out, and you just switch VoiceOver on, and it's just a revelation for people to see, on their iPhone, which loads and loads of people have, they've got a fully functioning, really good screen reader there, and that you can test with that, and it works on the iPad as well. So that's a useful test.
All right. Sorry, I was busy tweeting and missed the transition there.
And do you want to talk about other tools that you can use as well to test, that help to test?
Yes, absolutely. I've just started using Tenon.io, Tenon.io, and I believe Joe Dolson rolled out a plugin this week. Morten,
it's called Access Monitor. I put a link in the chat. You can share it if you like. It just basically, you install it in your WordPress site, and then it hooks up to the Tenon API and provides, you can go to a single page or a single post and just click on a button in your WordPress toolbar, and then it'll actually give you an accessibility report on that page. Now, when it does, there is pretty much a 100% guarantee that you'll get flags for things like the comment form in WordPress, which is apparently not up to stuff. So you have to really carefully read that accessibility report, because it's not just your content or your theme that might be at play here. It could also be your plugins and WordPress itself.
Excuse me. Thank you for sharing that. I installed it on my site and gave it a whirl, and you do have to read what it's assessing to understand what the results are. But yeah, a good learning experience.
But for theme developers, I really strongly encourage this. For theme developers, there are people in the world who offer this as a service, who will do proper accessibility testing of anything you create. Now, in the last week, there's been lots of talk about this new service that's going to be offered that is like a theme review service, for-pay theme review service, and the whole WordPress community is exploding with excitement over professional theme reviews. Well, you can get professional accessibility reviews of your themes too, and you really should do it so that you actually get it tested properly.
Are any of those people on this podcast today?
Well, that's something that I've done, and quite a lot of what I get involved in helping people improve the accessibility of their websites is, one of the first things to do if they've already got a website is to to do testing on that, whether it's a WordPress site or any other site. And yeah, I mean, and also as Rian mentioned, we did an audit of the Genesis theme recently, and since then I've done another 2 WordPress websites for people who wanted audits done. So yeah, that's yeah, and yes, if you want me to get involved in that, I'm quite happy to talk to you about that. Yeah.
All right, Graham is super hot.
Okay.
Yes.
And Rian too. You were gracious enough to take a look at Utility Pro and give me some feedback on that. So, are you available for those sorts of contracts?
Well, I'm not really a tester. I'm actually more a builder. My heart is in building websites, not in really testing sites. So I can look at your theme, but just for give you advice, but not for a job. So, sorry.
Okay.
Okay.
We're gonna let you create them, and then we're gonna send them over to Graham for assessment.
Yeah.
I probably won't have to test Rian's themes very much at all, though, will I? Really? But I won't be finding anything there.
Well, I'm rebuilding a Genesis now, so I'm putting stuff on the GitHub. So maybe if that gets committed, you can do another accessibility audit.
And I think like what you're hinting at right there is maybe the biggest thing for the WordPress community as a whole, both for Genesis and for everyone else, that if we're going to take accessibility seriously, one of the key features in making that happen is that the frameworks and the starter themes become accessible out of the box. Now, a lot of work is being done on underscores to make underscores accessible, so that at least when you start with underscores, you're starting with an accessible base. And you know, Genesis is talking. There's a couple of other frameworks that are talking, and I think once the frameworks and the starter themes really embrace accessibility from the get-go, that will help the whole community move into it more. One of the big fears that I keep seeing pop up whenever I talk about it is people panic about it'll make your site look like, what was it they said, Web 1.0, and or that they, you know, people get very concerned about autonomy when it comes to things like color contrast, which is an issue, but honestly not the big issue. The big issue is things like navigation and actually being able to access the content, because anyone who's used the web knows that if the color contrast is off on a site, you can just push a button on your browser and switch it. I mean, my phone, right on the front page of my phone, there's a button that says switch to inverted, and then it'll invert all the colors. That's like a standard default in Android now. So if you're concerned about color contrast, and that is the reason why you're not doing accessibility, try to move your concerns elsewhere, because that's really more of a design issue. The real problem is your drop-down navigation that makes no sense, and your 15 sliders that are completely inaccessible to people. But a lot of that can be solved by the frameworks buying into it. And you have to remember, if you ship accessible products, they have value in the marketplace more than non-accessible products. And I don't think that can be proven in any better way than my theme. Because I released a theme without telling anyone. And when people discovered it was accessible, all of a sudden it went from 1,000 downloads to 60,000 downloads in a matter of months. And that's just because people went, oh, it's an accessible theme. I need accessibility on my site. End of story, right?
Hey, you know something exciting? Back in, I think, September was the last time I'd gone over to WordPress.org and counted the number of accessibility-ready themes, and there were 13, I believe. And yesterday I looked again, and there are now 27.
Yep.
So
Okay.
it's, I mean, in a short time period, it's doubled. So it's exciting to see that people are taking it to heart and trying to make their sites more accessible.
And
I'm very optimistic.
And if things go the way we want,
Yeah.
there will be a time in the future where when you submit themes to the WordPress theme directory, it will be tested for accessibility, and you will be strongly encouraged to make your theme accessible out of the gate. We shall see.
You had a comment?
Yeah, well, I'm very optimistic. Okay, if I've talked to developers, they're all very positive and all eager to learn, and they all think it's important to know how to build accessible. Yeah, I'm very optimistic for the future. Also for WordPress, I think the Make WordPress Accessible team is doing very well at the moment, and if we get all the documentation out, we can help the people better to develop their sites more accessible. So I'm really optimistic. Yeah. Also for Genesis, I think when all the fixing is done of the issues Graham addressed, then the sample team will be WCAG 2 accessible out of the box. So then when you start with the sample team, you start with an accessible website. So for Genesis, I think that's great news.
It is, yeah.
Graham, did you have a comment from earlier?
Well, yeah, it was just echoing what Rian and Morten have said, really. I don't think I have a massive amount to add beyond that what they've just been talking about, really.
All right.
Just cutting in very briefly here. I've shared with you, Carrie, a link to the Norwegian accessibility laws in an English format, so that they're accessible to English-speaking people. I think that this is something that anyone who works with WordPress themes or plugins should take a close look at, because this is a law that's been passed already, but all the European countries are working on similar laws and regulations, and they basically flag accessibility as what do you call it? It's a right, almost like a human right. Everyone should have access to everything, and one of the key features of it is they actually specify that accessibility should apply to any website unless it is of a strictly personal nature, meaning unless it's a personal blog that has, quote, no value in the common discourse, it has to be accessible. And this is something that's going to start rolling out across Europe. So if you're a theme developer or plugin developer and you are targeting the European market, which is like 2 or 3 people, then accessibility is very quickly becoming something you simply cannot ignore. Because I often see people say things like, if someone tries to pass a law like this, I will fight it tooth and nail. And we could have a conversation about the morality of that kind of statement. But the reality is those laws are actually on the books. There's also a major lawsuit that just finished in the United States that has to do with accessibility. And the prima facie basis of that lawsuit is actually going to result in anyone can sue any website for not being accessible, including personal websites. And now there is on the books a ruling from Supreme Court saying, yes, web content needs to be accessible. So, not that there is a threat in this, but rather this is something that really has been defined as something that is a right. So not doing it is going against the general trend of what's happening on the web. And if you look at websites like A List Apart, you'll see the rest of the web community is embracing accessibility full on for these reasons. So we as the WordPress community should really step up and take the lead on this process.
Good stuff. I mean, seriously, you guys, I don't even need questions. You just go to town and see awesomeness. We don't have too much longer together, so be thinking, each one of you. I'm going to ask you for your favorite tool for testing or something that's helpful to you in terms of learning about accessibility or testing your building for accessibility. First, let's see. Oh, Jackie is asking, should you be able to access navigation menus without a mouse? And Jackie, the answer is yes. You should be able to use the tab button on your keyboard to go through and
then it's also useful that you see what you're doing.
Yeah,
so,
definitely.
Don't disable focus. Outline 0, for example, don't do that. Let people see where they are when they tap through the page. Give a clear outline to the focus where you are. That's also important because you get lost.
Certain browsers have settings that you may need to check. For the longest time, I could not get tabbing to work on a site. Actually, it was the Leiden theme. I knew it should work, but it wasn't working in Firefox, and turned out there was a setting in the preferences. So if you're on a site that you know should work, check the browser settings.
Yeah.
Somebody had a question or a comment. I heard it. Or maybe they didn't. Okay, let's go around the room, and Rian, we'll start with you. But please tell people your name and where they can find you on the web, and maybe a tip or trick about accessibility.
Okay, my name is Rian Rietveld with an R. Okay. I've got an English website, rianrietveld.com. And you can get all the info about me there. And I'm also on Twitter and in Slack and whatever you want to talk to me. The main issue for me for accessibility is everything should work with a keyboard. Then 90% of all problems are solved. And that is a check you can do yourself without any screen reader issues, whatever. Just tap, and with the space bar you figure it out how it works. And you can do that yourself. That's my tip.
All right. Morten, how about you?
My name is Morten Rand.
I can't believe you do that so well.
My name is Morten Rand-Hendriksen. It's not how it sounds normally, but that's how I go. And you can find me pretty much all over the web at Morten, like MOR10, because no one ever gets my name right. I work for lynda.com, where I make tutorials about WordPress and front-end development and accessibility and things like that. And I also write a lot of random stuff about the web on my blog, which is morten.com. But the question was, what is the main issue for accessibility for you?
A tip that you can give people, or maybe something that is your kind of most passionate issue about accessibility.
Content and communication. The web is all about content and communication. You should always think about how do people get to the content you're publishing in whatever way they want. That's kind of the impetus of this whole conversation for me. You're publishing content on the web to make it accessible to people. Then you should really make it accessible to everyone, because you don't know what's going to happen in the future. It's a good chance we won't be using screens anytime, like in a few years. So you better make your content ready for that.
I'm going to be driving along in my Google car, and it better read me your articles, Morten.
Just wait.
And Graham, how about you?
Okay, my name's Graham Armfield. You can reach me at my website, coolfields.co.uk, and I'm on Twitter as well, at coolfields. My one little tip for people who really aren't sure about accessibility, there is one tool that is quite useful, which is available for Firefox and for Chrome. And that is called the Wave toolbar. You can get it as an add-on for both, and you can just you load up a page, whether it's live on the internet or whether it's in your development area, you're working on it, and you just click the icon, and it gives you. It's not perfect, but it gives you quite a good rundown, and it shows you visually where it's found good things, accessibility features on your pages, and bad accessibility things on your pages. And it's got a whole series of icons. Ironically, for an accessible tool, it's very, very visual. And it's try it out. You can just run it on every page now. And you get a lot of useful information. It also externalizes all the alternate text for your images. It shows you the heading structure on the page. It shows you sort of field labels, etc. Just straight, just out of the box like that. And so that's quite useful.
Awesome. You guys are just appreciate what you're doing to help push accessibility forward. Primarily just through educating the rest of us. Like you said, people want to know, we just kind of don't know where to start. So thank you guys for your time today. And if you are listening live, very much appreciate it, checking it out. You can go to carriedills.com/subscribe to get reminders for this podcast each week, because, I mean, I know you want to be tuning in. And then if you're listening on iTunes after the fact, know that you can go over to carrydills.com/podcast and see the videos in case you want to see all of our fine guests in person. Well, in person on video. Morten, make a noise so we can see that. Oh, you stopped. All right. Well, on that note, we will we'll say our prayer of wells. Wow. Okay. I need to just stop now. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you, and you're welcome back on Genesis Office Hours anytime.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks a lot,
Carrie.
Carrie. It's been a pleasure.